In this video, I'll show you how I master my music to make it go from this to this. If you follow every step in this video, I can pretty much promise that you will get a sausage that sounds amazing, as long as your mixing is decent. For me, mastering essentially comes down to three things. First thing is enhancement, which is making some slight improvements to the track with EQ, stereo widening, and so forth. The second thing is loudness, which means getting it commercially loud so the track isn't too low in volume compared to other tracks on Spotify, YouTube, or whatever platform. The last thing is balance between systems, which is making sure the track sounds good in the car, on different monitors, in your headphones, and so forth. Before you start mastering, you probably heard that you should leave -6 or even -12 dB headroom in your mix. This is not true anymore. It was more of a thing you did back in the day, but if you have analog gear or really old plugins, you might still want to consider leaving a lot of headroom. But most of you probably won't need it. As long as your mixed track isn't hitting above the 0 dB threshold on the master channel, you should be fine. Because if you hit that 0 dB threshold, you will cause clipping and other artifacts that you don't want in your track before mastering. Also, you might want to turn up the volume on the drums that's peaking in your song. This is because the transients of those drums are going to get turned down in volume due to the limiting we will do when mastering. Last important thing is to make sure you have one or several reference tracks that you can compare your song with. This is incredibly important, and even more important if you don't have flat sounding monitors / headphones and if you don't have a perfect acoustic room. Because I'm just going to assume most of you guys' studios don't look like this. So do yourself a favor and get a reference track. Let's get into the mastering. First thing I add to about 90% of my songs when mastering is a Soundbanks with a preset. I know this is a bit odd since it's kind of considered a noob plugin. It's a simplified preset from the Maximus plugin. The reason it works is because I'm only using a tiny bit of it. And to me, it almost always sounds better. And like the saying goes, if it sounds good, it is good. Then I add an EQ. First I cut everything below 20 Hz and above 20 kHz, because those frequencies are simply unnecessary. Then I like to boost or cut out frequencies where it's needed. This is where the reference track comes in. In my case, I use the songs There For You and Takeaway because their synths and overall music is very similar to mine. In this case, I noticed I have more frequencies around these areas, so I turned them down. And as you can see, I'm very careful with the EQ. I'm not even going over -1 dB. I wouldn't recommend EQing over 3 dBs on the master. If you have to do that, just go back to fix the problem in your mix instead. After that, I add some light limiting to make it easier for the compressor that comes later in this mastering chain. Next thing I add is the Ozone 8, which in my opinion is one of the best all-in-one mastering plugins, not sponsored by the way. In Ozone, I first like to add an imager to manipulate the stereo field. First I make everything below around 120 Hz completely mono. The next band, which are in the low mids-ish, I usually don't do much widening. I might even make it more mono, because if you widen this part of the frequency spectrum a lot, it's just going to sound trash from my experience at least. The high frequency bands I always widen to a certain degree, but at the end of the day, do what fits with your song. Next thing I do is compression. I keep my radio around 2 and I keep my attack around 30 ms. Because I want the transients of my drums to still have a lot of punch. If I change the attack to like 1 ms, I would make my transients less prominent, making the track sound more dull and not punchy. I then push the compressor to around -4 dB gain reduction at most. I then add an exciter, which is a saturator. This plugin is going to add some harmonics. It's kind of that secret sauce to get that extra perceived loudness. Because when we saturate, we perceive the thing we saturate to be louder and more full sounding, even though it barely gets louder on the dB meter. So this is kind of a trick to get the track to be perceived louder while barely making it louder for the limiter. So in the low end, I'm really light with the knobs, and the higher in the frequency spectrum I go, the more I can saturate without making it sound terrible. I like to have warm in the low end and triode, I don't know how to say it, in the higher end, but at the end of the day it comes down to your taste. Last thing I add before limiting is in post EQ. Here's where I either compare my song's frequency spectrum to pink noise or to a reference track. This EQ would then try to make my frequency spectrum similar to what I'm comparing my song to. In this case, I compared it to pink noise. Then I go into limiting, which is going to get us the loudness that we want, and the loudness is usually measured through RMS or LUFS. There are differences between them, but we're going to make it simple, so let's just go with RMS. I would say around -6 RMS on the loudest part of your song should be what you aim for. I also like to leave a small ceiling around -0.3 dB true peak, and then I just play around with this knob until I get the desired loudness that I want, without causing too much clipping. And yeah, now I have a commercially loud track. If you mixed it properly, there shouldn't be too much clipping or artifacts happening. If that does happen, go back to your mix and try to solve it. Once I fixed the correct loudness and exported the track, I like to start listening in different systems, like my headphones, my laptop, other larger sound systems, in a car, etc. Whatever you have at your disposal. The song is going to sound very different in all these different systems, so I make sure to use the professional reference track or two that I picked before mastering and compare it to my own track in all these different systems. The first time I do this, I will find things to change for the better about 100% of the time. So I really recommend you do this as well. Then just go back and forth and fix the problems you find until you're satisfied with your mastering. One final tip I will share with you that I haven't heard anyone else mention before is to compare your exported masters to each other. I always do this every time I make a new master. I compare it to the previous one and listen to hear if it sounds better. It's extremely easy to hear the differences when you can instantly switch between the two like this. Then, if you want to feel proud of yourself, go back to your first master and listen how trash it is. I hope you learned something new and see you guys in the next video.